Hour. I am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Now, normally, when there are firings of senior government officials on a Friday, it gets called something like Black Friday. But Friday before last, there was a dual firing that we might call, well, we can't call it Good Friday because that name is taken, but it was a Good Friday. And here to discuss that Good Friday with us now, and I hope I'm not being sacrilegious, is our good friend Nancy Altman. Nancy Altman, as you probably know, is the executive director of Social Security Works. She is the author of numerous books, which we've discussed on this program and elsewhere, including Social Security Works for Everyone, her latest co-authored with Eric Kingson, and she joins us now. So first of all, Nancy, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Now, if you would, just briefly tell us about this, what I was calling a Good Friday.
I would call it a celebratory Friday, and I think there were celebrations all over the city for sure. And as a result of President Biden's decision, the commissioner of Social Security was a man named Andrew Saul, and the deputy was David Black. Andrew Saul had zero background in Social Security. He was a crony of Donald Trump's. He'd gone to Wharton School with him, made his money, a very high-paid donor, high contributing donor to Republicans, and of course became his payoff was the Social Security Administration, which of course is vitally important to everyone in this nation. He immediately became very anti-union, very anti-beneficiary, and was from the beginning extremely controversial. So there was an effort on the part of many of us to have him fired on January 20th. That's certainly what the Republicans would have done. And we had very powerful members of the Senate and the House who were calling for that. Joe Biden didn't do that, but he decided to do it Friday. The precipitating reason was that this hit the constitutionality of the commissioner's term was questioned. The Supreme Court had come down with a decision about a related agency, that the structure of being only able to be fired for cause, not just at the pleasure of the president, was the Supreme Court said you couldn't do that, and so President Biden took his first opportunity and removed both of them. And our nation is in much better hands now with an acting commissioner as opposed to a confirmed commissioner who's anti-Social Security.
And I want to get to why we're better off. But first, on the note of process, I found that there was a kind of irony and justice, I would say, in the way this came down. Because in my view, but I'm curious to know what you think, Trump came in, politicized all these offices that had been, public service, really. You're there to serve the public, politicize them with his, wealthy, far right cronies. And in order to do that as much as possible, this is my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong. In order to do that as much as possible, he wanted to fire professional agency heads and replace them with cronies, but the law said you can't do that except for cause. So it was the Republicans who challenged the law, and in my understanding, the Supreme Court said no, they serve at the pleasure of the president because they're part of the executive. And so Biden took that ruling as an opportunity to say, well, then let's depoliticize this position by taking these cronies out of the Social Security Administration. And now the Republicans are all indignant. You're not supposed to do that. These agency positions are sacrosanct, which is just unbelievable hypocrisy. But is my perception basically correct of what happened?
It is basically correct. You may nuance it a bit, but it is basically correct. And that is that we all expect, we understand that cabinet secretary, secretary of state, the secretary of Treasury, all of those secretaries serve at the pleasure of the president. They're appointed at the beginning of a new term, confirmed by the Senate, and at the end of an administration, you expect that they leave. Congress, policymakers in Washington who don't really understand a lot of these programs as well as they should, have a sense, particularly about Social Security, that, oh, we can make it above politics. It's just an agency that sends money out. There are no political decisions. And of course, everything is a political decision. You open field offices, do you close field offices? Do you do more reviews to try to make sure there's no fraud? Or do you spend the money trying to make sure the people who are eligible for benefits get those benefits? Every decision a commissioner makes is political. So in 1994, Congress tried to make this idea, oh, it's apolitical, by a fixed term removable only for cause. They also did this with the Consumer Protection Financial Board. It is Senator Elizabeth Warren's brainchild. And there's one other position that's like that. And you're exactly right. Donald Trump, with the Consumer Protection Financial Board, said, oh, that's, I want my own person there, went to the Supreme Court. They said it was unconstitutional, and that was thrown out. And using that precedent, Biden just went back and said, okay, well, we've got somebody who's anti-Social Security. I want someone in place, not who's going to be partisan, but is going to work for the American people, not against the American people. And that's why he fired them appropriately.
And I don't want to get into the minutia of government agency, human resources law, but I would have argued, and I think in effect you guys did argue, that Andrew Saul and David Black in Social Security Administration, DeJoy in the post office, that they could be fired for cause because their decisions have effectively made it harder for their agencies to serve the public. They've made their agencies less effective in carrying out their missions. And that, to me, certainly coming from the business world, if you run a department and you make it work less effectively, you're fired. That's cause. And so I always thought it was a little bit, I can't think of a better word, Talmudic, to say that you can't fire them from cause when they're, whether out of deliberate sabotage or incompetence or some mixture of both, their reduction in the efficiency of their departments is cause.
That's very interesting you say that, because we've been arguing since the election, and certainly since January 20th, that he could be fired for cause or without cause. But we had plenty of cause to be able to, that the president could point to, and we gave him constantly. Putting out op-eds and all the kinds of information as well as members of Congress were. You could fire him for this reason, you could fire him for that reason. But you're right, there was a sort of Talmudic, and in fact, the interesting thing is that I don't think it was made public. They were first asked to resign. He was asked to resign, and he was very Trumpian. He said, I'm not going to resign. And so Biden said, okay, fine, you don't want to quit, you're fired. And the letter, I haven't seen the letter, but apparently it's actually not clear whether he was fired for cause, because the letter apparently does go through many of the things he's done wrong. So there was a Department of Justice issued an opinion the day before that said the president has the authority to fire him with or without cause. And then the next day, the president fired him. So there was kind of an assumption, I guess it was without cause. But you're exactly right. As far as I'm concerned, he was fired for cause.
Yeah, it's, and again, we're talking with Nancy Altman, Executive Director of Social Security, where there was this, first of all, for some reason, I thought of that line from the producers after they go to Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder are sentenced for their crimes. Then the head of the jury says, "We find the defendants incredibly guilty." It seems to me that in terms of for cause, these guys qualify. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is. in terms of their refusal or Saul's refusal to retire, there was a time in British tradition when the honorable person was given a pistol, and when he failed at his job, supposedly, and sat down in his office and told to do the honorable thing, right? And obviously, we shouldn't have expected the honorable thing to be done here. So Saul is gone, but why? Let's get into the specifics a little bit of what they did in running the Social Security Administration. I mean, sure, Saul had no background in Social Security administration, so he might have lacked a skill set that would be very important or valuable in this job. But to me, it went well beyond that, I think. And tell me, what was the cause, if you will, that
Well,
justified this firing?
let me put it in a bit of context first, because since 2000, so for the last 20 years, 2 decades, there's not been a single confirmed commissioner of the Social Security
Hmm.
Administration nominated by a Democrat. They've and with Democrats, they've never crossed over a term, so that the last one confirmed ended in 2000, and then George W. Bush got a Republican that carried, and a second one that carried over into Obama's term. Obama didn't fire him. Obama appointed um, his own nominee, and just like Merrick Garland, the Republicans refused to confirm her, which is why Trump had his appointment in 2016 that carried over into the Biden administration. So this has been very one-sided. The Republicans, the conservatives, have more and more, they run against government. They think government is the problem, and they, of course, you expect if you want to convince the American people that government's ineffective and it's not there to help you and it's going to hurt you, that's how you run it. You make it really going after people. So lots of going after overpayments, not underpayments, where the government makes a mistake and is paying too little. But the government, there was one case where someone was receiving survivor benefits as a 4 year old when her father died. 54 years later, after her mother had also died, she got a notice from the Social Security Administration, thanks to this Republican commissioner, saying, "We somehow your family got an overpayment. You're the last one, so we're going to collect it from you." I mean, it's that kind of
Hmm.
harassment that undermines support for our government. So Saul was really, he was worse, but he was in a pattern. He wasn't different. He was much more less subtle about it. The others were hostile to the unions, and federal workers, and making their lives very difficult. He was out all out war against the unions, and the unions were very much precipitating. So things like no time to work. If one of the union members had a complaint, there was no time during the workday to be able to work on that. You couldn't meet with your members. It was all efforts to really crush the unions, and so and very anti-federal workers. And also the thing with Social Security, it was a trifecta, because by going against Social Security Administration, they went against Social Security, the program, they went against federal workers, and they went against unions. So they, as I
Hmm.
say, it was a kind of trifecta. And he exemplified what had been going on, but had really been a bit on steroids, which is what really precipitated all the opposition to him.
I sometimes think of Republican governmental appointees as being like vegetarian butchers, except that I like vegetarians a lot more than I like Republican government appointees. But, if you don't like the product, don't, don't deliver it. And I think you're exactly right. But to me, what I also want to emphasize about what I've seen in the Social Security. It's been a while since I wrote about the administration of Social Security itself, but I have, and what it seems to me gets overlooked a lot is the profound cruelty of what they're doing. that it's not, people view it in the abstract. Well, Republicans don't like government, so they don't help it work better or whatever. But in terms of Social Security, we're talking about, for example, people on disability. To get on Social Security disability, you don't have a mild problem. As you and I, as you know better than I, very hard to get on Social Security disability. So to make these severely disabled people jump through hoops to stay, to continue to get their benefits, to make it harder to get a hearing when you're denied, so that you have to wait 1, 2 years to get your hearing. Many people die while they're waiting for it. This to me is a Dickensian level of brutality, of cruelty. And to me, that's the part that sometimes, our press reports, well, a dispute between Democrats and Republicans led to the firing of 2 officials. No, to me, it's the Dickensian cruelty that led to the firing of 2 officials. But, what are your thoughts? I'm an emotional guy, but so what are your thoughts?
No, you're absolutely correct about that. That, and I want to be very clear. The Social Security civil servants, the public servants, the workforce, are very dedicated to Social Security and very compassionate and really understand what they're supposed to be doing. But the tone gets set at the top. And in the early days, it's a story I love to tell, is that, they understood that Social Security Administration was there to serve the people, that this program involved benefits people had earned. Early on, the first commissioner of Social Security really instilled in the workforce that they were supposed to help people. They were supposed to help them fill out their forms. They were supposed to really assist in getting people their benefits. GAO at first objected because there was a long-standing law that people who worked for the federal government were not supposed to assist those who had claims against the government. Arthur Altman, the commissioner, made an appointment with the comptroller general. They had a several hours long meeting where he explained why Social Security should not be treated that way. And GAO, to their credit, made an exception, said, no, Social Security is different. It's not that kind of claim against the government. It's not arm's length. We're working together to provide these benefits. That is gone now. Now the attitude is, and again, this is among the leadership, but the tone is that everyone is a fraud, as potential children who've lost a parent. They're just or children who have disabilities, or people who are widowed. They're just seeking to be, they're trying to rip off the government. They're cheats. And we have to keep checking up on them. Maybe this child's gotten better and his parents haven't told us. I mean, it's that kind of attitude that everybody is a crook. And that, of course, there's some fraud, and usually it's the frontline workers that find it, but there are many fewer inaccurate payments than you'd find with private insurance, and certainly much less fraud, because it's less than 1% is improperly paid, and a tiny fraction of that is fraud. In the private sector, you have like 10 or 15% can be fraudulent payments, much less improper payments. So here's the Republicans always saying we got to run the government like business, but actually in this case, it's run better than business, but they won't recognize that they're still going after. And as you say, it's very Dickensian, this cruel.
And I want to make an observation and a point, if those are two separate things. I don't know if they are, but Nancy Altman, the observation is, what we're describing to me was encapsulated, if I'm recalling correctly, by the fact that one of the Republicans in the Senate, I believe it was Senator Grassley, asked for a report on overpayments to Social Security beneficiaries, which was duly produced, but he did not also ask for a report of underpayments made to Social Security beneficiaries. In other words, he was rigging the process going forward. But the point I wanted to make, in addition to that observation, was that really, although it sounds like you and I are talking politically right now, because we're talking about Republicans versus Democrats, this is not, in my mind, and I'm sure not in yours, partisan at all. this is, you and I remember when it was really appreciated by society and honored when it was said, my son or daughter went into public service. And, I feel it's a soapbox of mine that we have to restore that sense of you're serving the public. And to me, this is a nonpartisan issue of anybody who comes in to an agency that's designed by the American people for the American people and tries to gum up the works for whatever motivation needs to be gone. And anyone who ideologically wants to undermine Congress's will in passing the Social Security Act and subsequent laws is, violating their oath and needs to go. And to me, I don't care at the end of the day whether they're Democratic or Republican. They seem to be clustered statistically on the Republican side. But to me, it's not a partisan issue. To me, it's an issue of what it means to do public service. I'm sorry for the rant, but that's,
I think that's exactly right. And I think, again, the parties have kind of aligned themselves as Republicans are really anti-government for the most part at this point. And so, whether it's conservatives, progressives, within the American people, I always say that it's completely bipartisan because the American people, not the ones who are in Washington jockeying for power or ideologues are trying to play to donors who definitely don't want government reaching into their pockets as they see it, and don't want to pay their fair share. The American people just want things to work. They're pragmatic, and they really like Social Security because it fulfills a basic economic need for anyone who's dependent on wages for basic necessities. So Republicans are, as we've talked about, are as supportive of Social Security as Democrats in the population. The problem is that the ones who want to demonize government as a mechanism of staying in power are the ones that are really out there to undermine. There's no reason that people have to wait hours to talk to a claims representative or sit on hold on a telephone. There is a $2.9 trillion surplus in Social Security. Some of that money could be spent so people get their phone calls answered immediately, but that's not.
And that, as you have said many times, would not contribute to the deficit because it's a self-funded program. So, let's accentuate the positive a little bit, Nancy Altman. We've talked a lot about what's wrong with the kind of appointee that really doesn't support the program they're running. Throws whatever spanner in the works, whatever that expression is. But what would good leadership, which hopefully we will get from this administration's appointee, what would good leadership look like? I mean, I would think if you come in now to run the Social Security Administration, one of your tasks is to rebuild the morale and sense of purpose among the people working there who have been kind of abused and mistreated. But what in your mind does positive leadership look like at the Social Security Administration?
Well, fortunately, I am really privileged to have been mentored by one of the best Social Security commissioners in the history of the program, Robert M. Ball. And he was mentored by Arthur Altman, the one I mentioned, who was the one who went in and argued with the Comptroller General. Bob Ball remains that longest serving commissioner, and he had a number of strengths, and I would model myself after him in large part. You're exactly right. We've got to rebuild. We have to restore the morale of the workforce. There were apparently dancing in the halls when the word came out that Saul had left. I actually heard stories about he was very upset because there's a Baltimore office and a Washington office for the commissioner, and it was renovated during the pandemic, and he was very upset because they didn't give him an executive bathroom, remodeled it, and he had to, I guess, go to the bathroom with the riffraff. And when he did, apparently when he walked down the halls, he would keep his head down, look straight, would not look at anyone. And if you even tried to engage him, he'd just ignore you. And that's just here in Washington. But the tone went out that the workforce was the enemy. It was all of the anti-union stuff that was done. So as you know, and that another thing he did was, and this was ironic, he, without any notice, cut off telework, the ability to telework. This was before the pandemic. You cannot do that to people. People have, have child care responsibilities and have set their lives around telework often. And you can't say, okay, starting next week, no more telework. But that's what he did. And then the irony of ironies was the pandemic went and we went to 100% telework. So they sort of went backwards. But it's that kind of disrespect for those who you're working with. So one is to restore I think the top priority has to be restoring the morale of the workforce. It was also restoring confidence in the program for the American people. And I quite frankly think a third is to work with Congress to get through an expansion bill. And let me say a moment about that. There's been, there's a game in Washington that if you want to get on the Supreme Court, you don't ever have an opinion about anything. You don't write anything. And if you're asked your opinion, you say, gee, that could come before me. I can't answer that in your confirmation hearing. You pretend like you have no opinions. And then of course you get on. Same thing with Social Security. It's, we just make sure the money goes out. Policy, politics, who, us? No, are you kidding? But that is ridiculous. As I said, the Social Security Commissioner, I think, represents policy and politics in the best sense of the word. And that is, how do we as a country collectively decide we want to use our common resources? And also Social Security Administration is where the expertise is. If you're going to make a legislative change, you have to know whether it's administrable. So this idea that somehow the Social Security Administration is up in Baltimore and has nothing to do with anything is a fiction that hurts all of us. So I think, and this again is in the model of Bob Ball, that you have respect for the workforce, that you understand the mission. That the other thing that used to happen, is very extensive training of the workforce, and not just in the particular job that person might be doing, but on the mission. So they understood how they fit within the organization and what an important part they played and what an important part the program plays. They used to bring everybody to the headquarters, even if they were working out in the country in a field office. So they got a feel for the whole organization. That inspires people to give the best service to the American people you can. And if I can say just one story, which really moved me, and that is that a colleague of mine started as an intern in a office in Oregon, and the receptionist was always greeted everybody with, very cordially and respectfully and so forth. And my friend once said to her, and this was when Bob Ball was commissioner, my friend, how can you be so cheerful, with everyone? She said, because I imagine the next person is going to be Bob Ball. And if you think of it that way, you're going to be, anyone who comes in, you're going to treat well. Anybody who comes in as my boss is the idea. And that tone comes from the top. And that's what I think we need for a commissioner, not just a technocrat who can, work on the modernization, as important as that is, but someone who really understands what this program does, what it means to the American people, the history of the program, and why it's so key to economic security, and how to improve it so that it's even better in the future.
Well, I think that's extremely well said. And Nancy, before I let you go, just this is probably unfair of me, but just maybe a minute or so, you published an op-ed the other day. Democrats have an historic opportunity to advance FDR's vision for universal guaranteed health care. Obviously, something like Medicare for all is not going to be on the table right now. But what were just briefly, I know you're going to have to go, but briefly, what was that point you were making?
I'm so glad you raised that. And let me actually mention another blog post I wrote just a few days ago too, about the Orwellian nature of program integrity, which we were talking about, because in Washington speak, they use that for saving money by taking benefits away from people, not program accuracy. And that's kind of the gist of that. As you know, there is a human infrastructure bill that's going through. There's the bipartisan, physical infrastructure, because that's what Republicans will support. But there's a very important human infrastructure, the ability to have childcare. We can't work if part of the workforce has to stay home to take care of children and so forth. And part of that is we need, you have to have a healthy workforce and a healthy population. That's part of our infrastructure. So that bill is working its way through. The very good news is, and let me say that Medicare, when originally Franklin Roosevelt wanted guaranteed universal health care, he was not able to do that because of the medical industrial complex that stood in the way. President Harry Truman then tried to do it. He couldn't do it. President Kennedy unfortunately died before he had the chance, but President Johnson picked up the mantle and decided to go incrementally and enact Medicare for seniors as a first step, the first incremental step in 1965. In 1972, people with disabilities were added to Medicare with the idea that you lower the age, you'd add children, you'd generally expand to Medicare for all. That, of course, didn't happen. But now Congress is talking about, okay, let's finally, since 1972, let's finally expand Medicare. They're talking about adding vision, hearing, and dental services, which is very important. They're talking about an overarching cap, an out-of-pocket cap, so no one goes bankrupt trying to pay for their health care. No one should go bankrupt. And there are others that we're pushing for that President Biden proposed, but may or may not make it into the package. Lowering the age to 60, where it's now 65, the earliest age of eligibility. One way to be able to do more and bring in more money is to allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs, finally, not just for the Medicare population, but for everyone, use the bargaining power that it has. And finally, health and community-based services so people can remain in their homes, which is what people want, around their families and friends and neighbors, which will keep them healthier as opposed to warehoused in an institution. So that's what we of course want Medicare for all. So this is a compromise for us. But we think these five are a good step and a very, very large step in the as you say, in the legacy of FDR, and we'll see how much we get. But I hope the people who are tuning in make their voices heard, because this is something we can definitely achieve as long as Congress and the president represent the will of the people as they are elected to do.
Well, it won't be everything I want, but it will help millions and millions of people. So I echo your suggestion that people use the phone or whatever technology they have available and let their elected representatives know they want these services to be available to people. So Nancy Altman, as always, and again, Nancy is the executive director of Social Security Works and a prolific author. As always, thank you for the wonderful work you do. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.